Good afternoon, selamat siang. Welcome to the third Monash Indonesian seminar series. My name is Reni Pulungan. I'm the Indonesian Studies Subject Librarian. Welcome again our colleagues and friends who have been coming and supporting Monash Indonesian Seminar Series, which is a collaboration between Matheson Library and the Monash Hafid Indonesian Engagement Center. So today's session is about cerita silat. Professor Edward Buckingham is already here to give a talk, and we can discuss about it in a little while. But it's a great pleasure for me to actually select some of cerita silat that we have in our Indonesian collection. As you can see, Kopingho and some other cerita silat that we have, and we do have a lot of those cerita silat in the Indonesian Special Collection. So have a look at it. And if you do want to come in a tour, if you haven't been seeing our Indonesian collection, I'm more than happy to take you after the session. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Pak Ariel, who is going to introduce our speaker today.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land we get gathered today. I'd like to pay my respect to the elders past and present. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all and to welcome Ed as our speaker today, particularly given the topic and his expertise. It's interesting that one of the best authors on essays on Indonesian literature was a political scientist by the name of Benedict Anderson. One of the best political analysts of Indonesia was a professor of law, the late Daniel F. One of the most inspiring authors of anthropology in my student days was a historian, James Clifford. And it's not surprising that we got one of the best writer on silat is somebody who's studying economics and business, right? So I can't wait to hear the presentation, and I would like to invite you to join me in welcoming Ed for this talk. But I also would like to remind you to switch your telephone to silent mode if you haven't done so. We'll have Ed to speak for about 40 minutes or so with presentation, and then we're going to have questions and answers after that. But before I start, I have just received great news from Marie Cliff. This is regarding our most valued professor, Stuart Robson, who has just won an award, a very prestigious one, so-called 2019 Alton Becker Southeast Asian Literature and Translation Prize. Congratulations. So, without further ado, I'd like to give the mic to Ed.
Thank you, Ariel. I think I'm switched on. Before I get started, I feel I should, as an ethnographer, I should give you a little bit of an arrival narrative to explain how this piece of work came to happen, came to occur. Barbara, Stuart and Harry each played a big role in this, but I'll go right the way back to the beginning when I was studying physics here as an undergraduate student back in 1990. And there was a university calendar that was published, a little red book, I don't know if you remember it, and we didn't have the web in those days, so as I was looking through it, it said exchanges possible to these universities, and one of them was Indonesia, it was to Gajah Mada. And so I wandered off into the arts faculty, and somewhere along the line I met Margaret, who introduced me to Joan Grant, who whisked me into her office and said, "You've got to go to Indonesia." And so at the end of my first year, I found myself studying maths and physics at Gajah Mada in Fakultas MIPA, the first foreigner to go there and study as an undergraduate, the first Monash student to go and study at Indonesia. I don't deserve any prizes for that. It was more just out of desperation to get out of the science faculty. Anyway, Barbara turned up with, I reckon, probably 20 or 25 undergraduates in tow, people like Sue Cattermole and Helen Wallace and various other people. And I had naturally gravitated over to the arts faculty to see these Australians, these people from Monash. And Barbara turned to me, and forgive me, Barbara, for repeating this story yet again. But Barbara turned to me and said, you know, when you go back to Monash, you know, science students can take courses in the arts faculty. Maybe you should come over and take a few courses. And as a typical science student, I turned around and said, well, why would I want to do that? Because I've learned everything, I will learn everything I need to know in a year here, plus the year that I was at high school in Malaysia as an exchange student. What would I get out of the arts faculty? And she turned to me and she said, we can give you theory. Wow. Theory. And this was someone who, you know, I mean, the way that we ingest theory in the physical sciences is very different. There's another story which I have to tell, which is the first class that we had, she persuaded me to come and sit there, and Kath Livingstone and Michael Hart and people were sitting in this class. I think it was called Literature and Society in Indonesia. And Barbara opened with the question, what is literature? And there was a pregnant pause. And I looked at the art students, I thought, geez, these guys are dim. No one's answering. And so I said, stories. And then there was this long pregnant pause, an embarrassed pause. And then the discussion started, because you see, everyone else had done the reading and I hadn't. And we talked about Benedict Anderson, we discussed what literature was, and then my eyes, literally, the universe opened up and I realized that I had an awful lot to learn. And I was very, very lucky to have the opportunity to come and do an honours year with Barbara and Stuart and with Harry, and look at heroic fiction in Indonesia, and particularly what was happening in Java. And decided along the way, because I'd spent some time in China, that I was going to focus in on Sino-Malay literature. And Charles Coppock, who's here today, he sends his apologies, was one of those people that inspired me, also Claudine Salmon and many other great writers in that area. So I focused in on Cerita Silat, and after flailing around for quite some time, having read all the books, because as you know, the books are very easy, once you've got a certain standard of language, they're very easy to read because they're page turners.
Addictive too.
Sorry?
Addictive.
They are addictive. They're written to be addictive, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it took me quite some time to actually settle in on a body of theory that I could use. In fact, Benedict Anderson's book was really pivotal in helping me write my honours thesis. But then a curious thing happened. I went off and I got a job as a consultant, and I went to business school and I started running businesses and factories and things in Europe. And then one day in, I think it must have been late 2008, 2009, somehow I reached out again to Leo Suryadinata in Singapore. And he said, Edo, by the way, in Indonesian circles, people call me Edo because Edward gets short too often to Dawit. And as you know, Dawit is like aga-aga. He used to call me Edo. He said, you should write a paper on this. And I was flying in and out of Singapore quite a bit at that time, so I decided that I'd write this paper. And I was working for my alma mater, which is a business school in France called INSEAD. And of course I was surrounded by social scientists. And there are a couple there who had gotten really interested in mimetic theory, which you would probably just know of as memes, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So as an opening, I just wanted to give you an explanation as to why I'm going to start with a couple of pages of theory. I'll read that out first, just to sort of set the scene. And then we've got some slides that show some pictures of some Cerita Silat. And then we're going to talk about, I'd like to talk about two authors. I don't know if we've got time, but we'll certainly talk about Koh Ping Ho. And I think we should also try and touch a little bit on Esham Itarja, because he was such a great individual, great human being. And then we can head on into questions and look at what's happening in the current day in the Cerita Silat world. So let me start out by just reading these couple of pages. Cerita Silat, a genre of modern heroic fantasy, became one of Indonesia's most widely read forms of popular fiction in the decades following independence. This paper will explore how and why this happened by examining two giants of Cerita Silat, the authors Esham Itarja and Koh Ping Ho. Using mimetic theory, I'll explore the literary migration of Chinese martial arts fiction, or wuxia xiaoshuo, which were made popular in Indonesia by way of translation, and its role in the development of locally produced cerita silat. And finally, I will consider cerita silat's influence as a national literature and the role it has played in defining the Chinese-Indonesian identity. Cerita silat is a product of literary migrations which evolved from sources such as local myth, Chinese heroic fantasy, and Indian legend. Cerita silat authors selected and then replicated, those words italicized, ideas that they sourced both locally and from abroad. The most influential source of inspiration were cerita kung fu, or translations of wuxia xiaoshuo, that is to say, the original Chinese versions of martial arts fiction, which we'll touch on a bit later. It is this evolutionary process that I'll explore in this paper. A mimetic view of cerita silat's rapid evolution from earlier sources offers a framework to explore how ideas or memes are transferred and why some succeeded and are replicated while others lie dormant, are left to wither or even cast off. Blackmore offers us the image of a world full of brains and far more memes than can possibly find homes. She then asks which memes are more likely to find a safe home and get passed on. In other words, which memes will be replicated? In order for a meme to be successful, it must exhibit fidelity, fecundity, and longevity. To take one example, there is a well-established research showing that altruistic, cooperative, and generous ways of behaving encourage reciprocation in societies where reputation is valued. For simplicity, we can describe these behaviors as charity and consider it a meme. Charity, the act of giving to those who are in need, is imitated and replicated at the behavioral level. However, charity in the literary sense can be replicated and propagated through the population only if it is lodged in a story that attracts sustained attention. I'll refer to this phenomena as a literary complex of memes, or a literary memeplex. The memeplex is a broad term that can cover cultural or political ideologies and systems which offer memes better chances to replicate and co-adapt. Memes within the memeplex may piggyback off the functional benefits offered by their co-travelers. During the construction of a literary memeplex, ideologies and values will be incorporated, sometimes unconsciously, into the creation. Tolkien, you all know who Tolkien is, The Lord of the Rings. And by the way, he was a proper academic before he became an author. Long before the development of mimetic theory, argued that the ingredients of fantasy literature and its forerunner, legend, are drawn or selected by the author from a collective pot of soup, a cauldron of story, which has always been bubbling, and to it have been continually added new bits, dainty and undainty. For this literary memeplex, or imagined space, to succeed or bespell the reader, Tolkien argues that there needs to be a structural coherence on a number of interconnected levels. All of these we consider different memes in their own right. For example, we can look for them in the levels of plot and ideology. For the story to seduce readers, the narrative must bind, connect, or relate to their preconceived imaginary structures. In other words, mimetic structures such as language, history, social norms must be coherent in the eyes of the reader so that the reality becomes suspended and the imaginary world embraced. Tolkien described failed fantasy as unbearable. This resembles what Blackmore describes as cognitive dissonance, the unpleasant consequence of holding two incompatible views. We've all picked up books which are simply too far-fetched to finish, and a few physics texts as well. Some ideas can create discomfort and require close reading and rereading, similar to the working through a mathematical text. Fantasy as a recreational literature lies at the other end of the spectrum, as it is consumed by readers, sometimes in an addictive fashion. When I asked Louis Cha, who is known to those people who read Chinese as Jin Yong, Jin Yong is probably the most influential fantasy author, I would say even outgunning Tolkien, because he's read literally by everybody in China. What made a good martial arts story? He replied, good narrative, needs some romance, some violence, some suspense, and when possible, humour. Success at writing popular fiction requires plenty of creative skill and a certain amount of luck. If a literary memeplex survives the creative and the publishing processes, its memes may replicate en masse. thousands or even millions of readers in the case of popular fiction may read the story. The potential for replication, and one would hope for financial reward, could be immense. Yet for some critical readers, its theme or plot may be perceived as banal or even cheap. The successful creation of a heroic fantasy is what Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the author of The Black Swan, might call a black swan event, a high-impact, hard-to-predict and rare event that is beyond the realm of normal expectations. Writing popular fiction offers a small likelihood of success, but potentially huge rewards, so authors need to mitigate this risk somehow. What better way to do this than to work with material that has already been successful, and for which these pieces craft something original? What are the common features of successful fantasy? Jung identified universal archetypes and narrative formula. A simple narrative, the goodies beat the baddies, and the hero and the heroine live happily ever after. When delivered successfully as a full story, this offers a reliable path to individuation and reader satisfaction. When archetypes are developed by the author as part of the creative process, memes are also replicated. These memes may re-enter Tolkien's pot of soup, stronger than when they left it. This natural selection, in a Darwinian sense, at work in the in the Darwinian sense, at work in the literary domain. The most attractive and memorable bits of the story survive in each reader or each wave of readers. We can safely assume that all authors are also readers. And so between authors, there may be a consequent mimetic evolution by way of imitation. This is unlike genetic evolution, where replication occurs by following the instructions or DNA. Blackmore offers two types of mimetic evolution: copy the instructions, or a more precise or digital replication process, and copy the product, where the replication takes place by inference. The second type of replication, though less accurate, offers the possibility to source features from a number of unrelated sources. Making pumpkin soup by copying a recipe should produce a consistent result each time. Meanwhile, copying a finished pumpkin soup, or a number of them, is likely to produce varied results. In literature, translations aside, we see primarily the copy the product type of replication. This copy the product process, where the mind assembles a literary memeplex, offers possibilities for replication unavailable to genetic evolution. For example, the origins of Tolkien's imaginary world, the Middle-earth, lie in his academic career as an expert in Old English literature, and one might argue in his very identity. His masterpieces are descended from the ancient texts he studied and lie within the same tradition. But transition does not have to be vertical only. It has been argued that Dante, when writing the Divine Comedy, was inspired by the Kitab al-Miraj and the works of Ibn Arabi. It is thought that he took what he considered valuable mimetic material, ideas which would stand a good chance of succeeding, and presented them in a Christian framework, omitting their Islamic references. The memes from one theological system replicated successfully to another. Christianity and Islam share common monotheistic origins and references, which are well suited to host these ideas. However, Christianity is not vertically descended from Islam, and in other words, memes can replicate horizontally as well as vertically. Literature can and does migrate across cultural, theological, and linguistic barriers. Martial arts fiction, considered as a literary memeplex, carries the memes of one popular literary tradition, by way of translation, from China to another in Indonesia. The success of this memeplex does not ensure the success of all memes contained therein. However, memes within the successful memeplex have a much higher likelihood of survival than those embedded in an unconvincing one. To understand Cerita Silat, the literary memeplex, better, we need to consider its origins and its mimetic bloodline. We can then begin to understand how the environment has shaped the formation of this genre. So let's just take a little bit of a look at the origins of Cerita Silat. It's a form of heroic fantasy, and it expands on ancient tradition of heroic mythology and legends indigenous to Indonesia. This heroic literary tradition has evolved and changed as the peoples in the Malay archipelago have come into contact with successive waves of outside influence, such as the Indian subcontinent, the Middle East, and the West. A recent and discernible outside influence has been that of the Wu Sha Shuo. I should just add that Wu Sha Shuo, just to explain what that means. Wu is the character for martial in Chinese. Sha is a complicated character, but it basically refers to a chivalrous code of conduct. So it's very deeply rooted in Confucianism, if you like. And then Xiaoshuo means novel, which was documented by Salman and Surya Dinata in the book Literary Migrations, and also by Surya Dinata in Sastra Peranakan Tionghoa Indonesia, and Xu, who is I should just say a couple of words about Professor Xu. He was at the Foreign Languages Institute in Guangzhou. He was originally from Burma, but he got caught in China after 1965, and then basically had to make his living as a teacher of Indonesian language at various language institutes around the country. So I've referenced all of them. The works of Jin Yong, Liang Yusheng, and Gulong, and these are three of the giants of Chinese martial arts fiction, came to Indonesia by way of translations made by Chinese Indonesians, such as Okate, and by the way, there were two Okates. There was a senior and a junior. I narrowly missed out on meeting the junior one. He died shortly before I started doing my research. And then Gan Ka-el, who was based in Semarang, a charming old gentleman, which in this paper I'll refer to as Cerita Kungfu, that is to say the translations. Cerita Silat owes a great deal of its mimetic legacy to these translators who performed a critical role in shaping the martial arts fiction genre in Indonesia in terms of plot, language, and readers' expectations. Cerita Kungfu evolved into a locally created Indonesian martial arts fiction more commonly referred to as Cerita Silat. Incidentally, rising rates of literacy during the period when Cerita Silat emerged hastened its development and mimetic replication relative to Cerita Kungfu. Memes, and by the way, the Cerita Kungfu was written in a very stylized, somewhat antiquated Malay. So Gan Ka-el, he spoke Mandarin as his first language. He sort of learnt Malay after the fact. So whilst you could read them, some of you here may have done, it's hard going. And then we transition into this period with Koping Ho where, just about anyone can read it. The language is so simple and so easy to digest. So the memes from the Chinese Wu Sha Shuo, they went through some transformations as they were retold, adapted by Indonesian authors. The Wu Sha Shuo memes entered Tolkien's pot and eventually re-emerged as a fully indigenous literary memeplex, which resonated powerfully with the local populations. There have been two branches of this development, both of which, with younger generations of Indonesians, eclipsed its progenitor, Cerita Kungfu. One branch, dominated by Koping Ho, used the Chinese imaginary space, and the other, pioneered by S.H. Mintarja, used an Indonesian imaginary space. Recent creations bear a striking resemblance to those of S.H. Mintarja's works. It's significant the style established by Ko, which is still popular, has not been imitated. That is to say, we don't see people writing Cerita Silat in Indonesia about things happening in China, and there's a reason for that. I should add also, though, that Koping Ho did write books located in Indonesia, and they were reasonably successful, but nowhere near as successful as those by S.H. Mintarja. And just one other quick thing. Koping Ho's works were typically very popular right across the country, Java and everywhere else, whereas S.H. Mintarja's works generally were only appreciated by people of Javanese ancestry. So in some respects, Koping Ho was more of a national icon than S.H. Mintarja. All right, so I'm not going to talk about Chinese Indonesians for a moment. I want to just refer a little bit to what drove Ko. And I was lucky in that I went to visit him not long before he died in Solo. And the man that I met, he was on to his second wife. His first wife, she was Peranakan like him. He had a little villa up in Tawamangu, where he used to do his writing, and he fell in love with a local girl. Is the short story. And he had a child with her. That created a lot of tension within the family. Koh Ping Ho was someone who was, and you can tell this from his writing, he was a very passionate figure. He writes, for example, I write to pour out the contents of my heart. By writing, I can release expressed issues which are in my soul. For example, in my everyday life, I often come across and am inwardly angered by the injustices, tyranny, and greed which I see. To criticize directly, I can say quite honestly that I do not have the courage. But with Charita Silat, I can criticize without the risk of hurting anybody's feelings. I am one of the rebellious types. When I was young, that characteristic dominated. Certainly a rebellious spirit is needed in a young person. We must be bold enough to say what is wrong, improve which is already good, and change the established order where it is obviously wrong. The man was an entrepreneur. If you think about the word wira usaha, right? And kawira usahaan and kawiraan, kapalawanan. He saw his writing as a manifestation of his kapalawanan, if you like, his own heroism. And so, I mean, without going through all of this, I think sometimes it's better just to talk to the point. He would be absolutely devastating criticisms in his stories of corruption. I mean, it never ended. Every turn of every chapter, something had been done, something nasty. It could have been sexual abuse. It could have been physical bullying. It could have been injustices in government and so on. And he told a story. He told it to me, but I also read about it in a newspaper later, where a judge had come to see him, furious, and accused Koh of using his stories to attack him personally. And Koh responded, the people that I write about in my stories are fictional, and they're in China, and you're not Chinese, and you're not fictional. So it can't possibly be about you. Okay, and then the man eventually calmed himself down, and then whipped out a book and said, could he have an autograph? So Koh, and I think I'll show a little video later that I think articulates this better than I can. But the role of fiction is absolutely critical in giving people a place, particularly in Indonesia at that particular time. It gives them a safe space in which they can pass social commentary and reach out to young people and propagate those memes in a fashion that is relatively safe. There are martial arts fiction authors who have gotten into trouble. One of them by the name of Aswendo. Right? Do you remember that incident was it 1990 or 1991?
November 1990.
It was November 1990, wasn't it?
The 5th of November.
The 5th of I remember it well. Did you have a personal interaction with this?
I studied that.
You studied it. Well, there we go. Well, look, Aswendo, I went to interview him as well to talk to him about his books, and obviously he took a lot of pleasure from it. I think his failing point was that he should have kept the survey in the book. Like he should, instead of getting out, he lost track of where the fiction started and the reality began, and that's what got him into trouble with the Indonesian government. But Koh was pretty good at managing that, and he pushed the barriers a long way. The other thing that he did that was kind of interesting was every narrative, usually particularly in popular fiction, it reaches what Jung calls a eucatastrophe. So you build up a series of problems through the script, multiple plots, and then you bring them together for one massive resolution at the end. And Koh would, just before the climax, and sometimes just afterwards, he would come out with pages and pages, of sermon, literally sermon, about why we should love one another and not be racist and so on and so forth. And there are good reasons for this, because this was a man who, as I said earlier, he was Chinese Indonesian, but really, and I only realised this after going off and living in China for a long time, the man was totally Indonesian. He was not Chinese at all. He didn't read Chinese, he didn't speak Chinese. He flitted with the idea, he toyed with the idea of becoming a Chinese national after some particularly unpleasant racial riots in Tasikmalaya in the 50s. Moved to Solo because he felt it was a more stable environment to be in, but was traumatized by what he had seen. in these very violent incidences. And you'll see that this carries all the way through his stories. The China that he writes about, the meme that he latches onto is one that was developed by Jinyong Gulong and Liang Yisheng, and that was a China which was dominated by foreign minorities. And we're not talking about Europeans. The Europeans don't appear in these stories. This is definitely in the pre-European era. This is China of the Yuan dynasty. This is the China of the Ming dynasty and of the Qing dynasty, where you have foreign minorities, foreign tribes running China. And it's all about, in these wuxia xiaoshuo, it's all about rising up and integrating and finding some sort of a political solution to the tensions between these different communities. And so in Ko's books, he often writes about Muslims in China that are suffering under the Chinese regime. It's a way, if you like, of turning to many of his readers who were Muslim to say, well, it's a little bit of that, the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And he does very well at doing that. You know, the people that I interviewed all across Indonesia, they latched onto this, and they could resonate with it. And I think the other thing about it, beyond just the religion, is also in terms of ethnic identity. As you know, Indonesia is a very multi-ethnic environment. And so as a Minang living and working in Jogja might be the same religion as his, you know, the locals around him, but he perceives him, or she perceives themselves as a minority in that very Javanese environment. So this position, this ability to articulate a story or a spell that resonates with a marginalized group within a larger context, and then take that narrative through to some sort of resolution, was one of the things that made him terrifically popular. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. I think I should say a few words about S. Hamintaja, because for me, he's such an important person. S. Hamintaja, like Koping Ho, lived in central Java, only he was based in Jogja. S. Hamintaja he trained as a teacher, and to make a few extra rupiah, he wrote this book, and it was called Nogososro Sabo Intan. And this is the bit that always makes me feel a little bit bad for him. He basically gave the book, or he had it serialized by Kedaulatan Rakyat in Jogja. And I've never really had a clear answer on this, but my impression is that Kedaulatan Rakyat actually took possession of the script. They took possession of the copyright. But Ko never made that mistake. Ko had a printing press. He had a business that he was a fully integrated, I think the only integrated literary business I've ever seen. He wrote the damn things up at Tawamangu, he came down the hill, he gave them to his son printed them, and then out they went to the lending libraries. I mean, it was an extraordinary integration of that business model. S. Hamintaja didn't do that. S. Hamintaja was a very gentle and philosophical soul. One of the first, when I remember sitting in his living room one hot afternoon, and we got talking about his stories, and then with great excitement he disappeared off to the next room. And Stuart, I don't know if you remember this because I told you about it afterwards, but he came out with this Babat Panajawi that had been written out by hand. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my God, I've got to tell the people at Monash, because this is, this must be golden. Apparently there are quite a few of these texts floating about. I don't know, but anyway, he was someone who Ko was in love, had idealized his heritage, if you like, in China, and then latterly his heritage from Indonesia. But S. Hamintaja lived it. I mean, he lived within a stone's throw of the Kraton walls in Jogja. And he wrote lots of Ketopra, and people knew him, and he had tons of social capital. And he represents a bit of a break from everybody else, because instead of drawing on inspiration from Chinese wuxia xiaoshuo, he writes his own story. And this is what he writes at the beginning. These are the opening lines. With this book, I hope to point out that this land of ours also has the material from which a story like this may be composed. And so, Nogosostro Sabo Inten, it tells the story of the Siti Jinnah faction and the breakup in Demak, and then the losing of these two sacred kris, which give a wahyu, or give an authority to a leader in order to take the position, or the Chinese would almost say tianyi, to give you the Arthurian right to pull the sword from the stone and become king. This is what Nogosostro Sabo Inten is all about. These kris, they go missing, and it's the story of a young warrior who goes out. Of course, he's unmarried, he's single. It's a classic sort of archetype. He goes searching for these kris, which are being whisked around the countryside by some crazy mystic individual. In the story, you will find glimpses of the Ramayana. There's a long sequence where the hero goes off to study his old master. And you can see, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Drona from the Mahabharata, where I think it's Aryasloka goes off and he meditates on the statue of his master. I think in that case, it's Drona, in order to learn the skills to become a great warrior. So there are passages like that that emerge in the text, and from which Mahasa Jinnah gathers his spiritual energy. And of course there's Roro Willis. I don't know if anyone remembers Roro Willis, but there's a picture of her. I'll show a picture of her later. Anyway, so this book was phenomenally successful. Again, written in a serialized form, highly addictive, and we can see these origins being common, even though they weren't planned that way. They were common to the literature in China. So Jin Yong, when he wrote his books in Hong Kong, and I managed to interview him about this as well, that basically they were done in order to sell the newspaper. Someone came to me earlier and said that we used to wait. You were saying earlier that we used to go out and buy the newspaper because it had the story in it, right? So that's why this literary form was written in that manner. And so that's what Jin Yong had done with Liang Yusheng and Gulong in Hong Kong. But it should also be said that serialized fiction in the West, people like Dickens and so on, their early work was also written with the same ideas in mind. So very tight chapters, usually ending with some kind of cliffhanger, and then all coming together at the end, if you like. So I think now would be a good time to have a bit of a look at some pictures, because my voice is starting to go. What have we got? Right, so there's the book Literary Migrations that Claudine Salmon edited. And there we go, there's an image of genes and memes. So you've got mum and dad, you've got a new gene, and you've got an old meme and a new meme. Two old memes, you mix them together and you get a new meme. That's the basic idea behind it. This is Jin Yong. So he died last year, one of the wealthiest men in Hong Kong by the end of it. And he was what they call part of the new faction, or the new group of martial arts fiction authors in China. So there are three generations. There's the original martial arts fiction, such as The Water Margin or Journey to the West, which many of you would know through the series Monkey, which we used to watch on ABC TV. And then there was a second generation of martial arts fiction that sort of came out in the late 1800s. And then there was this group that appeared in Hong Kong, and these three gentlemen, Gulong, Liang Yusheng, and Jin Yong, that appeared in Hong Kong. And curiously, you'd have to talk to Jeremy. I don't know if any of you know Jeremy Barmay, but Jeremy is one of our leading sinologists. He reckons, along with John Minford, that in fact these two gentlemen actually did quite a bit of the writing for Jin Yong at one point, because Jin Yong was too busy running this newspaper. But the really key thing about this is that there's a really strong emphasis here on self-determination and identity. And this is one of these things that really resonated with the Indonesians during that period. So here we have books on on Koh Ping Ho, which have been published in Indonesia. with some fantastic calligraphy down the side. As I said earlier, Ko Ping Ho had no Chinese language skills to speak of. And it took me quite some time to actually decipher some of the words that he uses in the text, because he'd taken it from someone else in Hokkien, and then to work it out what it was in Mandarin was quite hard. So they talk a lot about the Dunya Kangao, if you remember that from the book. Well, Kangao actually in Mandarin is Jianghu, or the land of lakes and rivers. So that's a direct reference back to the water margin, which is one of the 4 great Chinese texts that everybody has to read at school. This is Ko Ping Ho's warehouse. This is the Gemma publisher. It's not a high-tech operation. It's literally like a hand press. Back in the day, he would sell a lot of these to lending libraries. Those people who ran the lending libraries, they would make all the money. What was interesting was that when Ko Ping Ho died, there were all of these lending library owners from all across Indonesia. They all congregated in floods of tears, because this was the man who had enabled them to actually make their livings. I don't think we have lending libraries now, but you can still buy the books, and typically they don't come in free little installments like that now. They usually come in books, and I have a couple which I plan to give to the library later. So that's how they appear, wrapped in plastic. And then here we have S.R. Mitarja, his 2 great works, Nogo Sastra Sago Inten, and the second one, Api di Bukit Menore. Again, great reads. If you've got nothing to do on Friday afternoon, good to read. I should add that it was the easiest way to do my honours thesis, by the way, Dara, because it was so simple to read through this stuff, and a lot of good fun at the time too. Right, I wanted to just show you a couple of videos of how these things are being recreated in the current environment. So here's a bit of Cinetron.
Yeah.
It's probably enough. I just wanted to make sure we had more of this pop up. Thank you for that. So the second character that you saw there was that's Mahasa Janal's girlfriend, just in case you missed that. She's also pretty good at what she does. And let's have a quick look at Wiro Sableng. So Bastian Tito is another quite famous author. Perhaps he was much younger than Ko Ping Ho and S.R. Mitarja. And what's interesting is that the hero in his story is kind of goofy. He's a bit nuts. He's a bit sort of chaotic. And what's been fascinating is that although Bastian Tito's now passed away, his son has come back as Wiro Sableng, which is extraordinary. So Sableng meaning crazy, I think. You need my clicker?
No, you can take it. But I think it's a conflict thing.
Yeah, hang on. I'll do it for you. Just to show you.
See, the mouse is not really.
Hang on. There we go.
That's it, yeah.
Right. So that last production of Nogo Sosro Sabo Inten's that was from a long time ago. Things are getting a lot more. You've got to keep it on presentation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, no, don't go to that one. Go to the other.
Okay.
The one at the bottom. There we go.
sentuh yang jadi bagianku. Kerajaan telah diambil alih. Yang akan kau hadapi itu bukan lawan sembarangan. Kabari Zura agar segera bersiap.
Seorang pengkhianat berbicara tentang kesetiaan.
Salam hormat Tuan Putri. Aku Anggini.
Aku sangka kau, bujang gila tapak sakti.
Mati kau, Maisa Milan!
Aku yang sabar. Guruku sudah pernah mengutusku untuk membawa kembali ke Gunung Gede.
Kulitnya sanggam, punya gendang.
Sudah lama kami menunggu kamu.
Oh, maaf.
Can you go back to the slide just a second? Okay. So there are a number of aficionados of martial arts fiction out there, and one of them is by the name of Terence Toe. And what he has to say about Wiro Sablin is fantasy epic with bad jokes and paper-thin plot, which is probably fairly accurate. But what I wanted you to note here is that just how far the form has come in terms of the media. So that, what we saw earlier with Nogo Sosro Sabo Inter, which is a much better written story, by the way, and I think even Bastian Tito would have acknowledged that at the time, is still stuck in this format. And I think it has something to do with who owns the rights over the script. I'm almost certain that S. Armitage's family don't do that. The Tito family is a lot more commercial. Bastian Tito, he had an MBA. I remember going to visit him in his house in Jakarta. It was this monstrous thing. He had a big picture of Wiro Sablin on the wall. It's not surprising that his son has grown up 25 years later and become Wiro Sablin in a story. So I just wanted to go back to something I said earlier about how Koping Ho's images of China stopped with him, that it didn't continue. The reason for that is that the same wave that started Koping Ho's career, that is to say the translation of the Treta Kung Fu, the translation of Jin Yong's works, eventually caught up with him. Because Jin Yong's works were then turned into very, very successful high-budget films, not unlike the one that you just saw in terms of quality, but with really sophisticated storylines. And these stories all came to Indonesia in the 1990s. So he occupied a spot in the market representing China for readers, but with the opening up of relationships between China and Indonesia, that position was then retaken by the Jin Yong Mimoplex, which arrived in the form of those martial arts fiction films. There's another picture of Wiro Sablin. Another one we should perhaps talk about briefly is Langit Kresna Haryadi. I've met this guy. I tried reading his book. Maybe I'm older now and I just don't have the patience for it. But this particular book, has anybody read it? Gajah Mada, the Gajah Mada series? Yeah, how did you find it?
Yeah, it's imaginative. I mean, the narrative is good, but not as good as the Api di Bukit Menoreh, for example, or Gending Mataram, or kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that as deep as what I read before.
I would agree with you. But what's interesting is that at the front of his book, he pays tribute to S. Armitaja. It's one of the first things he does. He says, I learned how to write these stories from S. Armitaja. you may wonder, well, why are we bothering with all of this stuff? Well, it's important because there's a new generation of Indonesians that are coming through that are learning about Gajah Mada, not from the history books, from what they learn here. And so I think that's significant. I think it's worth discussing. How much time have we got left? 30 seconds.
5 minutes?
All right. I wanted to show you one more video. And this is Rocky Gerung. Does anybody know who Rocky Gerung is? All right, people are starting to laugh. Okay, so he's a quote-unquote philosophy professor, was at UI, all sorts of crazy ideas. Interesting guy, a big promoter of feminism in Indonesia, which was kind of interesting. In this video, you'll see him on a talk show with a whole bunch of lawyers debating the merit of fictional work and how fictional work is important to have that in society. And he gets into trouble because there's some conservative people, Islamic conservative people, on the panel who start to take issue with him when he says that kitab suchis are also fictional. Right? So he's in deep water. But let's just see how he pulls himself out of this position. Okay, so if we just click on the video.
Closing dari Rocky Gerung.
Oke, nggak ada pertanyaan.
Nggak ada, terserah Anda.
Oke, saya mau bicara lebih tajam karena itu silahkan bantah duluan tuh. Nggak ada yang mau bantah duluan ya. Oke, saudara, ini tadi saya buka Twitter, itu semua orang bilang membosankan itu. Karena seolah-olah ada yang diulang dan kita mengalami involusi di dalam memutuskan status dari tema hari ini. Dan sangat mungkin kalau ini berlanjut pola ini, maka sebelum 2030 yang bubar itu Indonesia Lawyers Club itu.
I have to pause because it's a long video. Needless to say, he gets into trouble, and this is where he ends up in order to save himself.
Masa berburu hashtag?
Bro, saya mempersoalkan itu, berangkat nih. Saya tidak anti. Ya itu pendapat Prof, tapi kita punya cara pandang sendiri.
Iya,
saya tidak anti kalimat
dia
itu.
juga bebas berpendapat dong.
So he's starting to sweat it.
Oke, udah malam lagi. Saya cari cara buat nutup ya. Salah satu fiksi yang saya paling suka, dan Anda semua yang sini saya kira masih sempat mengikuti, fiksi yang dibuat oleh Ko Ping Ho itu. Ko Ping Ho itu nggak pernah pergi ke Cina, tapi dia bisa menggambarkan antropologi Cina, landscaping Cina, dan ilmu silat Cina itu demikian lengkap, demikian sempurna sehingga kita terbawa di dalam imajinasi itu. Jadi fiksi itu menghidupkan. Salah satu quotation di dalam Ko Ping Ho saya masih ingat sampai sekarang. Jadi Anda lihat betapa fiksi itu berbekas. Dalam satu adegan silat, Ko Ping Ho gambarkan begini. Tokonya namanya Bukek Syamsu. Masih ingat ya?
Tahu.
Ko tulis begini nih. Bukek Syamsu telah menyarungkan pedangnya sebelum tubuh berdebah itu jatuh ke bumi. Jadi saya bayangkan waktu saya masih SMP, secepat apa besutan pedangnya Bukek Syamsu sehingga dia sudah menyarungkan pedangnya baru tubuh berdebah itu jatuh ke bumi. Kalau orang bertanya, siapa Bukek Syamsu? Siapa tubuh berdebah itu? Tunggu 2019. Terima kasih.
Ini bukan pengamat.
Very Very good. Does anyone have any questions?
So you finished?
I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Now we would like to invite comments or questions from you. Would anyone like to start? Yes, Margaret.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Great talk. I'm interested in your use of mimetic theory, and I'm wondering how you're using it. I think the Cerita Silat is probably named because of all the exciting Silat fighting in it, or do you know why it was called Cerita Silat? That's one question. But secondly, you're using the memes idea as if it were just like melodic formulae in literature, structures of language. You can also, of course, do that in music and in dance and in, well, that's what we do. I don't know if you know, there's a book just out about Silat in general in Indonesia, which you do know?
Yeah, keep going.
Which actually talks about, analyses all the various structures of movements in Silat in the various parts of Indonesia. And I was wondering if you could actually extend, you'd be interested in extending your idea of genetic analysis to include more than, well, you mainly talk about ideas, memes that are ideas or structures, and would you be interested in doing it, in doing similar kind of analysis in other areas?
Absolutely, Margaret. And to say I hadn't anticipated that question would be wrong, because if you I just moved something on the slides, and you'll see here that in fact there's a book that's been published called The Memetics of Music, a neo-Darwinian view of musical structure and culture. So to answer your question, absolutely.
Now that, the book there's a lot of memetics of music,
Yeah.
but there's a one out about memetics of Silat in Indonesia, the dance movements and the memetic structures or analytical structures in music and dance. I know you're not doing that.
I'm not aware of it,
No.
but it doesn't surprise me at all.
No.
Because all cultural tropes, I mean, they're built up from memes, right? So I've focused in on narrative memes, but it happens in music, and it would happen with Pencak Silat as well, I'm sure.
But your narrative are ideas rather than structures of language? Are they, or both?
Well, they can be both. It's both.
In your case, in your analysis?
In this case, it's both. You have, there are structures, which are memoplexes, and then within that there are subplots, or there are ideas lodged within it.
And the relationship between the memes that are ideas and the memes that are structures?
They're both memes. One is structural.
I know they are, but I mean, in your analysis, are you focusing mainly on the idea of the memes as ideas, or as memes as structures, or both?
Both.
That's my question.
Both.
Thank you for answering it.
Yeah, both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Thanks for fascinating presentation, Edward. I was wondering, what's your comment about cerita silat based on comics in Indonesia, start from Aku Sase, and then Hasmi, and later generation of cerita silat based in comic version. Also, what about why did you choose the Nogo Sastra and Sabuk Indan instead of, for example, Api di Bukit Menoreh? Because this version is much more longer and deeper than Nogo Sastra and Sabuk Indan. And maybe when you mentioned about Langit Krisna Haryadi, I also interested to know what's your opinion about maybe later like Aswendo with Senopati Mapungkas, or Seno Gumira with Nagabumi. Have you heard that story?
I've heard of them, but I haven't read them.
What's your opinion about it? Thank you.
Okay, so the reason why I focused on Nogo Sastra Sabuk Intan is because when I talked to my classmates and friends in Jogja, they said, this is the one you've got to read. This is better than Api di Bukit Menoreh. It was also shorter. It was, and it was thousands and thousands of words to read, but it was a much shorter text. One day I will read Api di Bukit Menoreh, but I haven't gotten around to doing that. It's a long story.
Yeah, almost 500 episodes.
Sorry?
Almost 500 episode in newspaper.
500 episodes, yeah. So it's a long one. Why did I focus on that particular author rather than the other ones? Just because the people that I spoke to said that S. Armitage was the best. It was really as simple as that. So much of what you go after is based on what other people think is worthwhile. Yeah. Sorry, was there another part of that question?
Yeah, about comics.
Oh, the comics,
yeah.
comics, yeah. If I had continued doing research on this stuff, I probably would have started looking at comics as well, because the comics, they came after this. So we had the Mahabharata, we had the Ramayana, they filled out wonderfully. But that was more of a 1980s phenomenon, wasn't it? No?
No.
80s, 70s?
No. I grew up with that in 1960s.
Comics as well?
Oh yes, definitely. I still have a copy of Kosashi's comics.
Right.
I gave it to my son. I had it when I was, I don't know, 10 years old. Yeah.
Right. But relative to Cerita Silat, the comics had the advantage, not initially, but certainly into the 70s and the 80s, the comics were more widespread, I believe.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Bashi. Oh, you've got it.
Thank you very much, Professor Makan. My name is Hashim Abdul Hamid, the Monash Asia Institute. When I look at the videos, it reminded me very much of this Jackie Chan kind of presentation, where lots of jumping around, men flying over the clouds whatsoever. What is the purpose behind it all? One thing I realized is a media of trying to tell the people this is the best thing, most popular show, and at the same time you can tell them this is rubbish or not. Do you agree with me or not?
I think there's an element of truth in that. I mean, of course, S. Armitage wasn't around when these more modern productions were done, but I could tell that he was, I think like a lot of authors are often disappointed with the way in which their works come out on film. But it should also be said that Nogososro Sabo Inten was turned into a radio drama by the national radio station in Kota Baru in Jogja. And I'm just trying to remember the name of the guy. Pak Widayat played the role of Mahasatyanar. And that was phenomenally successful. So that was just people reading the script. And I think without dwelling too long on the points made by Rocky, the act of actually imagining what you're reading is really good for exercising the brain. Watching those videos, I think, it's a bit limiting. And just about everyone I've ever interviewed who reads this kind of stuff, they prefer the books over the films.
It's fantastic for children, particularly.
Yeah, but actually, I mean, with a 12-year-old son now currently who doesn't particularly like reading, I actually wouldn't mind a bit of coping ho injected into him, just so that he's addicted to reading, so that he's turning the pages. So there is an educational benefit, I think, in terms of getting kids hooked on the reading and not on films.
One last comment or question from anybody? Yes.
I'm just wondering, you were talking about the radio, made me think of podcasts and the rise of audiobooks and that is sort of audio first, potentially into the future. Do you think that will happen for these kind of stories? Do you think there's a place for that?
I think it's possible. But someone's got to come up with a business model that works for it. It has worked in the past. It has been effective in the past. But actually, what I think is killing it off at the moment, or killing that opportunity, are these automatic readers. So you can go online and you can listen to Api di Bukit Menore or Nogososro Sabo Inten being read by a computer. It sounds horrible, but you can do it. And kids will train their ears to put up with that rather than listening to an actor reading it. But one hopes that someone will get off their backsides and narrate it, and present it properly. Because I think there's an art form there, the raconteur, the ability to bring these stories to life, which is it's an art form, and kids should learn it. Kids should learn it. I mean, don't forget these stories. I know a lot of adults have read them, and even Sri Sultan Yogyakarta is famous for being a big fan of Nogosostro Sabul Intan. Apparently used to take it to cabinet meetings and all sorts of things. And even the officers' school in Bandung, there was a period where young officers were encouraged to read this stuff as part of their training. But really, it's for adolescents. All the values that are imbibed in it. Koping Ho was very clear that he was trying to educate, and Esa Mitaja as well. They're trying to educate a new generation of people to take on a different value system.
Thank you. Can you join me in thanking? I would like to make a few announcements with this series. So from next month, our monthly series will begin in the morning at 11 to 12:30, and the next one in May will happen on May the 9th, and we will have Dr. Megan Downs as a speaker. She'll be speaking on consuming conservation, media, and the environment in Indonesia. Okay, and there are a few other announcements in events that I'm pleased to announce. On May the 6th, we will have our first visiting fellow to the center, and he will be the political caricaturist Alit Ambara. He'll be here to exhibit his work, and there'll be a panel discussion on this. The main person behind all this event is Birgit, our colleague, Birgit Bragler from Anthropology. She will have an origin on this. That will be May the 6th. I just have to remind you, on May the 15th, abstract for our conference will close. So if you have not submitted, please do so. For anyone who writes on Cita Silat, you are most welcome to submit your abstract and Chinese identity. That will be May the 15th. The abstract submission will close. Okay. Then, as I mentioned last month, we're going to have David Lestari, to visit us as our second visiting fellow. She will present her work. Most likely, we have to confirm this, but it'll be on June the 16th. Okay. Then there's one more big development in our center. We are pleased to announce from next year, the Hervey Center will offer 2 scholarships per year from next year and the year after, one for PhD, one for master from Indonesia. So we will open that. We are preparing to make the announcement later on with the Faculty of Arts, okay? But also, Ibu Margaret Kartomi has a very exciting event to announce, and I'd like to invite her to announce it herself.
Thank you. If you would like, all of you have heard gamelan music from Central Java and from Bali, but we at Monash now are doing other things, outer islands, and we're having a big concert in the M Pavilion just by the entrance, Wellington Road entrance of Monash, in the new building there, on the 5th of May. It's a Sunday afternoon, and it's music and dance, really new music and dance from Lampung and from East Kalimantan and from Betawi and other parts of Indonesia. So do come along. It's going to be with Indonesian food on sale too. We just had a concert of Indian music last Sunday, because on the first Sunday of every month, the Music Archive of Monash University and the Music School, together with the Campus Centre at Monash, putting on a series of multicultural music and dance concerts with food each time. With the food of the, so last Sunday we had lovely Indian food and mango lassi drinks and everything. That was very nice. And there were grandmothers down, and young children, and everyone there from all age groups. It was a fantastic atmosphere. And we hope the same kind of thing is going to happen this time. There's one of our stars over there. This is Rehan Sudrajat, who's just come back from East Kalimantan. He's going to perform on that occasion. He plays a sape from Central Kalimantan, or East Kalimantan, I think, this time. And his wife, too, is going to put on dancers from Lampung, because it's linked to Lampung, too, as well. It's not just linked to other parts of Indonesia. He's Sudanese, of course, but... so it's going to be a great concert, and do come. It's free, and the old idea is to to bring to Monash University Clayton here the multicultural community of southeastern Melbourne. Here we've got masses of Vietnamese and Chinese, Indonesian, other Asian and European and other multicultural groups living in this area. And we've been talking about this for many years, and now we're doing it this year. We've got some money to do it from the university, from the campus centre. So do come along, it's going to be very entertaining on May 5th, 2 o'clock to 3:30.
Shall I also remind you about the tour? Is it right? It's going to be a tour? Library?
I think most people have seen it, yeah.
Yes, if you're interested to see the collection of Cerita Silat at the library, right? Just let Ibu Reni know. Thank you so much. So see you next month.
That was great.